Hello everyone, and welcome back to yet another video on the channel. Today we are taking a more in-depth look at a recent AAA game from Square Enix. It's one I've covered in a recent video, go here to view that. It's Forspoken. As I mentioned, I made a video a few weeks ago of my first thoughts about the game, and that was after just a few hours of gameplay. And it was particularly after seeing the game get a lot of criticism. And now I want to follow up with my thoughts now that I've completed the game. So strap in to hear all about Forspoken, and as always, beware, spoilers are ahead for the entire game. And there are some big ones in here. With that covered and out the way, let's begin by talking about gameplay. To summarise Forspoken's gameplay as briefly as possible, it is mostly good. The parkour both inside and outside of combat is really cool, but sometimes a bit difficult to control. I played on the controller and struggled with it a little bit, but that could also just be a skill issue. I'm not the best gamer in the world. Once you do get a hang of the controls, the combat itself is actually really unique and entertaining. You're able to pull off some really cool spell combos quite easily, which is great, and the dynamic of parkour and spellcasting is just an awesome one in general. I also love the concepts of the spells themselves. To me, phrase magic is awesome, and all based upon the earth in some way, which is a nice concept. And each Tanta you defeat adds their own spells to the mix and gives you a diverse range of really awesome spell concepts. And I think the dev team really smashed it out of the park in that area, and by the end of the game, you've got such a diverse choice of what spells you want to use, particularly for the final boss. With reference briefly to the Tantas, they are initially the main villains that Frey must defeat, and each one acts as a very unique and interesting boss, with the boss battles themselves being unique and exciting. Exciting combat, whilst also presenting a good challenge to the player regardless of the difficulty level that the player has it set to. The option to choose multiple routes into battles too provides a good gameplay element, and it's great to give you a sneakier option to face less enemies than going straight through barging in the front door. In my opinion, the settings of these boss battles are also just absolutely epic. My personal favourite is Tanta Olas, and her manipulation of an illusion of New York that serves as like a pseudo boss battle. And when you discover her, she has ceased from simply trying to keep up all of the illusions. It must also be noted that in my first video I experienced quite a lot of lag and bugs, but it has to be noted here that these were mostly gone by the time I was finishing the game. My PC was ultimately still struggling to handle the game, but as I said in my previous video also, I need to upgrade, desperately it seems. So it could be due to that, but it also could be how the game runs. I would have to upgrade my PC and replay to find out properly. I think the change from buggy to non-buggy was partially through a patch that occurred midway through me playing, because I didn't experience any of those bugs after a certain point in the game. Following on from that, just to talk about some more of the negative aspects of the gameplay, really my main negative comment is the lack of actual substance in the side missions and quests. The open world itself is absolutely beautiful, and combined with the parkour, it's really awesome to move around in and explore, but the actual world itself is filled with almost a complete void of any interesting side missions to complete, in my opinion. Every side quest marker is to obtain a new set of nails, a necklace, a cape, or some supplies. In some cases, this is necessary to improve your ability to complete the next main mission level, to essentially level up and get better gear. You need to complete some of these things to advance the story in that way, but it is mostly completely unnecessary for you to do any of it to get any kind of story information out. It's genuinely really easy to just skip them. You can run super fast through your parkour, so you just parkour and sprint past. But what it does is it makes this beautiful world feel just really empty, which I suppose in some way, because of the lack of people, it genuinely is, and that's part of the story. But in a game you want it to be filled with exciting things to explore and investigate and find out about, and it's just lacking in that area in some way. You may basically spend most of your time just running to the next main mission across half the world. The real shame about it is that the main questline is awesome, but outside of it, the gameplay feels really repetitive. And although many of these different side missions have a lore reward, if you will, something that gives you information about the game world to some extent, it's not ultimately necessary to complete any of these to finish the game or to get a different ending in any way. It's just go here, defeat the enemy, go into this labyrinth and defeat enemies, etc. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Even the side missions that are based within the hub city of Sipal aren't very entertaining, and are mostly just fetch quests of some kind, or speak to this person, find this person. They do often have some character interactions that give us some kind of dialogue and information about the world. But as I really said in my previous video, these characters in Sipal often feel very much like they're just kind of shells of people rather than actual characters. There are very few that are actually gripping, interesting characters that you want to spend more time with. But there are two side quests that I enjoyed when I played through. I think they're the two best ones of the lot when you're out exploring the world, two best things that you can be doing. The first one is the familiar taming. These are basically like Tanta's cats, but they're like demon cats, I guess. They have like horns or weird like spikes in different places. One of them has wings and can fly around. They're really, really cute. You get these really sweet mythical cats joining you in the safe houses, and so it's quite cute to finally make your way to a safe haven and have all these cute cats around you, watching what you're doing and cuddling up to you when you rest to recover your health that you desperately need. The other side quest I kind of want to mention is labyrinths. I know I mentioned them before in a more negative light, but of the go here, kill them, acquire new gear side quests, they are probably the best ones. They basically take the form of, well, underground labyrinths that you can have multiple routes and you have to try and find your way through to get to the end. And at the end there is a big lore payoff in terms of like some information about the world. They were a really cool concept, but I think they're just lost a bit. It would be better if the other side missions weren't similar to them, because it would probably make the labyrinth stand out a bit more, as they do stand out in the game world, because you can see the big structure of them from a mile away. But it would be great if they stood out compared to all the other side content that's in the game. I think this feeling that I have about this is definitely amplified because I'm used to playing games like The Witcher 3. I've covered it already on the channel, but to me the side quests in The Witcher 3 are all short stories within themselves, and you can be satisfied with loading up the game to play through one of the side quests to conclusion, and then log off thinking you've had the conclusion of that like almost short story, if you will. Some of those short stories, even in The Witcher, are really, really simple. They're not necessarily completely complex, but they do give you a window into the world, and some minor, non-important characters in some cases' existence within that world. Whereas here, everything you do is for Frey's benefit, and any info you do get is purely historical. It's not related to another character necessarily or anything like that. I do know that this is a consequence of the nature of the world to some extent, because there's no people in the world because of the break, which is a part of the story. But I feel like there should be at least some quests from the townsfolk in Sipal to find and complete things in the rest of Athia. To go somewhere and find a lost heirloom, or, you know, go and uncover information about what happened to a family member. You know, these things are very, very simple, and okay, I agree that these could also become repetitive over time, but I think it's just one of the crucial things that the game is missing. It needs those short story-esque side missions to give the game something more. If you have a relationship with a player, like Auden for example, and she tells you that her father might recover some of his memories if you were to retrieve this particular thing from somewhere within the break, and it gives you some information and builds your relationship with her and her father, then that's all it needs to do. It doesn't need to be hard hitting or huge. It just needs to have something that gives the player something more than just nails, a cape, or a necklace, basically. With that kind of semi-rant over, my last comment to make is that although I understand the decision from the developers, at times it can be a bit frustrating that you have no way to decide what Frey chooses beyond the final critical decision and some dialogue choices you get to make throughout the game. I think this can often be quite frustrating for the player to not be able to divert her course in any way, or most of the way, as she does make some frustrating decisions, but that is within her character to make. And when I come on to talk about her character, hopefully I can, I will be way more positive about it, because her character is brilliant. It's one of the best bits about this game. That was really my last point on gameplay, so now that we've talked about the gameplay, let's move on and talk about the main story of the game. And I promise you, it is all positivity from here, because the story and the characters of this game are absolutely brilliant. So let's get into it. In my initial review of the game, I was reluctantly hopeful that the game would continue to build on the beginnings of the story and the characters that it had set up nicely in the first few hours of gameplay. I am pleased to reveal that it has completely exceeded my expectations, and I have a lot to say about it, so I will do my best to convey it all to you now. This script was incredibly difficult to write. The best place I think to start is by talking about the mysteries that the game sets up. The first of these is about Frey's past. You know that she was abandoned as a child, and so there are lots of questions about where she came from and who she is. The game then follows that up once she travels to Athia. The questions then become very much about the mystery of the place, the Tanters, the break, and even Cuff himself. The game therefore effectively starts by presenting you with many questions, and over the course of the main story, satisfies you with answers to those questions, whilst constantly providing compelling twists and turns in the story that keep you on your toes. One of the ways it keeps you on your toes is through emotions. Frey is a character who knows how she feels and expresses it. It's part of what makes her such a brilliant main character. But more on her character later in the next section. The emotions are the most relatable element within the story, and the game is great at building relationships between Frey and the different characters. And a lot of the twists that are provided are in the form of deaths. The death of Frey's allies often alters her character and takes her down new paths. The game uses her emotional response to these deaths to drive her story forward. For example, the first key death is Olivia, who consequently drives Frey's quest for vengeance against Tanta Sila. Following that, Robian passes away, and that causes Frey to fall out with Auden, which eventually leads her down the path to face Tanta Olaf. And then finally, the death of her mother, which essentially unlocks the completion of her character arc, and then brings her to the peak of her powers, is probably the biggest example. The deaths, therefore, are not only just twists in the story, they are also the things that drive the plot points forward. And it's not just deaths, there are also two other key twists in the story. One of which I managed to predict whilst playing, and the other one which I didn't. I did not see coming at all. So spoilers ahead for two major plot points incoming. You have been warned. The first of these is that her mother was a Tanta. I felt like this was quite obvious from quite early on in the game that this was how it was going to pan out, and it was one of the things I wrote down as a prediction. It was fairly easy to see coming, given that there had been some references to it throughout the game. The second major plot point that alters the story is that Cuff is actually a demon who almost wiped out Athia completely previously, and is also the source of the break. I did not see this coming at all, and boy was it the twist of an absolute lifetime. One I enjoyed, and how they depicted it absolutely immensely. It completely took me by surprise, and it deserves a lot of marks, this game, just for that. It's really great for a game to keep you on your toes like that. You could sense that there were always twists in the story coming, but you could never tell what they were going to be. Maybe it struck me harder because recently on this channel, as you've seen, I've been playing, or in fact replaying, games like The Witcher and Mass Effect, which I already know very well, and I know the twists and how they end. But this one absolutely got me. Look, hook, line, and sinker. So in my notes, I literally just wrote down, now this is a twist, holy shit. I think the story in some ways is so clever to pull the wool over your eyes by making Cuff a friendly character, that the arc of the change from him to being that friendly sidekick to an evil villain is just such a shock. I was not expecting it whatsoever. In the section prior to the major twist, the introduction of Tanta Olas was an incredible one, and it's done through an illusion of New York that I mentioned earlier. Her character and design I absolutely love, and I love how the level plays out right to the climax of her being already dead, leading into that reveal for Cuff, and essentially starting and setting up the beginning of the end of the story. The story really binds together so well because you have no reason to assume Cuff is bad. The Tantas are so clearly evil, and the ones that the game wants you to think are evil, obviously, from the very beginning, and to some extent they also do just need to be destroyed. They have been corrupted. So to then make that mean that the main enemy is actually strengthened and emboldened, in that kind of reveal, is really awesome. I loved it completely. The gameplay post-reveal is a lot of backstory in a short space of time. It's backstory to what happened, and it's revealed through the spirits of the Tantas, including Tanta Cinta, who is Frey's mother. The whole section then is basically lore and backstory, and gives you all of those answers that you need to the questions that have been set up in the beginning. Gives you information on the demon you're going to face, and while she's learning about all of the Tantas and their powers, she regains her powers and starts to understand her true strength as the daughter of a Tanta. As I said, the section is a lot of backstory in a short space of time, but it really does answer the mystery set up at the start. And it's very satisfying for the player, especially after such a grand reveal, and ultimately helps give the player and Frey herself a reason to care about Afia after the events that have just happened, her losing her powers and everything seemingly going wrong. It's really the game's way, through Tanta Cinta, of trying to convince you to stay and fight rather than go home, which is the next and only major choice that you can make as a player in the story. It's really bold of the game, and I always think this whenever I see games give you that kind of decision. I think it's really bold of them to give you a choice like that can just end the game then and there. But I do think that the story of the end and the build-up and the follow-up of the ending, including the final battle, means that most players will make what I think is deemed the right choice to stay and fight the demon you've just unleashed. Providing you do choose to stay and fight, the final battle is so rewarding because it's epic from start to finish. You're initially fighting with your mother, who, by the way, is also in her dragon form at the time, and then she eventually makes the ultimate sacrifice in her sad death, protecting you so that you can live. This leads to Frey unlocking her true power in what is a really well-designed final form. Looks super awesome. I love her character completely, and her transition into this form makes for an absolutely incredible final battle as you unlock a couple of extra powers that allow you to dodge even better than you could before with the parkour skills. In my opinion, the main story, the storyline of this game, is what makes this game a great game. There are definitely bad points in the gameplay. As I mentioned above, a lot of the open world feels very empty, and some of the side characters are a bit off. But these, in my opinion, are minor compared to how good the main story of this game is. That's just my personal opinion. It really completely blew me away, and I was not expecting that to happen at all. I think the story is a great example of a plethora of strong female characters, and not just in your conventional sense of strength, but strength in their convictions, their intelligence, and they're all performing different roles. It's not just Frey as the main character, but a lot of the side characters, including the Tantas themselves, of course, all represent strong female characters. I think it's just a wonderful game, this one, and it's one that is definitely setting up for a sequel, judging by all its final cutscenes and the reveal that Cuff actually lives on in Frey's arm now. My final point is actually a callback to my previous video in which I said that I wanted to play through the game so I could be reunited with Frey's cat from New York, Homer, at all costs. So my final point is on that cat. Homer. You do get to talk to Homer if you stay in Athia. I was hoping that she and Frey would actually reunite and that she could play with the familiars you tame in Athia, but it doesn't happen. I was quite sad about that. In fact, the only way to actually see Homer again and have Frey and Homer make contact again is by making the choice to go home when Tanta Cinta presents the opportunity to you to end the game right then and there ahead of the final battle. So you would miss the epic final battle. Obviously the game will encourage you to do that final battle, and so most players won't go home to see Homer. Homer, however, is happily still in the final cutscene, and is as cute a cat as ever. That was really my final point on the story. I hope I've managed to summarise all of the thoughts I had about it in a succinct way and it made sense, because that was really, really tough to summarise, because I loved it just that much. So now we've covered that story, let's talk about the characters. My first thoughts really with regards to the characters is that Frey and the Tantas are by far the best ones in the game as a whole. I don't think this is any surprise. Frey's character arc is obviously intrinsically tied to the story itself. A story that I just spent the last 11 minutes or so telling you about how much I loved it. Frey's character itself is interesting and relatable. She is a reluctant hero, which are some of my favourite characters to explore in games, and she's really not natural at being the hero at all. This makes her very, very relatable, and her character very relatable. She probably has the most relatable reaction to plunging headfirst into an unknown world with sudden magic powers I've ever seen in a game. A lot of main heroes will obviously take that in their stride, but for her it's different. Especially as I noted in my previous video, she does swear a lot, and I think that wins her points for me as a fellow regular swearer. The story then slowly builds up through her relationships with other characters she's just met for the first time. At first this is mostly through Olivia, who she briefly becomes a mentor for before her death causes her to exact revenge. I think, despite the build-up of vengeance, the game does really well to show the impact of unleashing that vengeance and killing Tanta Sila has on Frey, the impact that has on Frey. She is a very, very honest and upfront character, and she's very real. She's real throughout the entire story, and this, I think, endears her more and more to the player as the game goes on, because her reactions feel genuine. Later, her reluctance to be the hero and desire to simply get home leads her to fall out with Auden and her allies in Sepal. I think this is mostly because she is not used to kindness and support, and so rejects it by looking out for herself. This makes her seem self-centered when in reality she is just traumatized by being abandoned as a child. I think it's very interesting to me that Frey as a character is so keen to get home to New York in the entire story, despite the fact that no one really ever helped her there, but she instead rejects the help of these people in Athia who have shown her nothing but kindness. It really is an intriguing part of her character and her story arc and how she as a character thinks about the world. It's clear that Frey has some kind of abandonment and trust issues as a result of being a foster child, and therefore there's a complex character arc. And I think Cuff's betrayal, as mentioned earlier, adds to this. I think she started to truly believe that she was finally the hero, and the one actually doing the good deeds for Athia, only for it all to be stripped away and revealed as actually one great evil deed that she had been doing over time, for a demon she didn't even know about. I think it amplifies her trust issues until immediately after. That backstory element I was talking about before is the story guiding her through to help her better understand that her mother actually loved her dearly, and only gave her away through the Tirana to save her from the fate that her mother befell, turning into a dragon. Frey's story arc thus goes from reluctant hero in the early stage to not a hero at all. It was actually Cuff the whole time, and then after that backstory element flips right back around to she is actually the chosen one. Her mother always loved her, and the backstory reveal tells her that she is essentially the chosen one, the Tanta of all Tantas. I think that's really an awesome ride for the player the whole time, because I think that the first bit of the reluctant hero is played for so long that the shock of it all being taken away, followed by it being reinstated over time, is quite a good dynamic and a good element. And I love the dramatic story reveals that are woven in between Frey's character arc. Essentially, her character arc completes with her mother's death. It's the final act of maternal sacrifice to unlock Frey's true potential, and by showing her that her mother does love her and would protect her till the very end. And I think that whole end section, from this character and story point of view, is such a good payoff. It's done so well and it fits so well with the story, her character, and how the story is tied together. Frey's character really ties itself well to the story. It's such a strong and developed character. The arc is an absolute ride for the player, and the payoffs to the mystery surrounding her character are actually well worth it throughout the entire game. That really concludes my thoughts about Frey as a character, so I would also like to talk briefly about the Tantas, and also some of the other side characters, both good and bad. The Tantas are both great adversaries and also awesome allies in the game. Their designs themselves as characters are absolutely awesome. I think the differences in their character being reflected in their magic was an awesome touch. And I also love that the game shows you them before they became corrupted. When you first meet them, they are all in their corrupted forms, and clearly something is not right. But it's a great insight into their true character to see them as they were pre-corruption, and shows how far they had fallen once getting corrupted. Moving on now to Cuff. In my first video, I said that I believed Forspoken had tried to make Cuff like Wheatley from Portal 2. And I'm here to say that I did not expect that to actually come true. He literally went from slightly talkative and slightly annoying sidekick to main boss of the game. 0 to 100 real fast. Obviously, it's not a direct parallel to Wheatley from Portal 2, but it's pretty much there. I don't really have much more to say about his character, because the twist of him being an enemy all along really stunned me too much to focus on him. And before that, whilst it was clear that he was the source of Frey's powers, his conversations did not provide anything of note. Just, extra information about the world and someone to discuss events with. I think it was really clever, the game using his character to convince Frey to essentially do his bidding for him before switching him into the final boss. I thought that was a really unique and clever way of doing it. My only other character related comment is linked to dialogue, which is the next section I'm going to talk about. I found Wallace and Milia to be really awkward and not very fulfilling characters. I think some of the ones in Sepal really could have done with just a bit extra to take their character up a notch, if possible. Most of Sepal, actually, aside from Juridi, Auden and Robian, all had something significant to them. The others were somewhat lacking. So yeah, following on from my talking about characters now, I would just like to talk briefly about my thoughts and feelings on the dialogue of the game. Initially, I thought that I would have a lot to say on dialogue of the game, especially as this is where the majority of the criticism from the game was directed, especially in the demo and the initial release. However, I really don't have that much to say, so I'll try to summarise it as quickly as possible. I think, in my opinion, that the dialogue isn't actually too bad at all. There were lots of criticisms for it, but I don't necessarily see where they're coming from. Cuff can at times be annoying, but it doesn't become unplayably annoying at any point. In fact, I would argue that, given his character arc, as I've just revealed, it's kind of within his character to be as annoying as possible. But it's never unplayable. I think the cutscene dialogue between all the different characters, good and bad or friend and foe, is generally good. Out of cutscenes, the game, I think, pauses in dialogue way too long sometimes, but again, I'm unsure if this is because of my PC causing some kind of audio lag, or whether this is like an intended part of the game for there to be such a delay between characters speaking. I think dialogue between the characters in Sepal still feels very off at times, as I mentioned before, particularly with Milia and Wallace, the guard captain and the bard. I think Wallace is generally my least favourite character of a video game that I've played, maybe ever. By contrast, the Tanta's dialogue, both as villains and as allies, is really strong and contributes well to pushing the story forward. Frey's dialogue, on the other hand, can be close to cringe in some places. I think these are very few and far between. In general, I really love her character and her dialogue. I think she speaks exactly as she should. I don't really have any criticisms. I can understand where some of the initial comments came from, perhaps, but I don't think it's nearly as bad as it was made out to be. Overall, I think there is not actually too much to say on the dialogue, despite this being a point for heavy criticism and critique by Twitter. If I really have nothing further to say, it probably means it wasn't as bad as people made it out to be, as I was genuinely playing through the game expecting to be let down by it during my playthrough. It really wasn't a letdown at any point. In fact, if anything, the story and the characters, particularly Frey, blew me away. To conclude my final thoughts, what a game. The story alone is incredible in my opinion, and Frey's character arc throughout the whole game is fantastic. I have said it many times, I probably should have put a counter on screen, but I love her character. It is woven so well into the story and the world. Each of the boss battles is unique and interesting, and it all just gives a lot of variety, both in spells and different enemies. The twists of the game constantly keep you guessing, and that's a great feeling. The game starts by presenting a lot of unanswered questions, but these are answered over the course of the conclusion of the game, and the answers are generally very, very satisfying. The dialogue was not as bad as it was made out to be. The game itself was quite laggy at times, but also that might be my PC, and since the patch I think most bugs I've seen have been fixed. My final recommendation is to play this game. I'm not sure if it's worth the £65 that I paid for it, but I think it's worth paying when it reaches something that you personally are willing to pay or can afford to pay to play this game. So that really concludes my video on Forspoken. I've really enjoyed playing this game. I do hope you will check it out when you get the chance to. Thanks everybody so much for watching once again. Please leave a comment with any feedback as always, and leave a like and subscribe if you're new here. Thanks everybody, take care, and peace.